The photocopier's ozone burn hung in the air as I pressed my badge against the reader, listening for the soft beep that meant I still had access to the executive floor. 3 months of Tuesday morning document runs, and the machine still wheezed like it was drowning every time Dr. Patricia Henley's research proposals fed through its ancient rollers. I counted my breaths 1, 2, 3, while the pages dropped into the tray, each one carrying another grant application that would never see sunlight. Efficiency requires focus. Dr. Marcus Webb had said at last month's faculty meeting, his Princeton ring catching the fluorescent light as he gestured toward the budget projections. What he hadn't said was that efficiency meant Patricia's applications would stay buried beneath committee reviews that stretched like taffy while his hand-picked researchers sailed through approvals in record time. I stacked the copies with the precision that 7 years of administrative work had drilled into my muscle memory. Patricia's latest proposal, a longitudinal study on environmental toxins in underserved communities, sat on top its methodology section, dense with the kind of rigorous design that should have had the National Science Foundation throwing money at our university. Instead, it would join the others in what I privately called the Tuesday pile documents that existed in perpetual review limbo. The elevator dinged behind me, and I turned to see Dr. Webb himself stepping out, his Italian leather shoes silent on the polished concrete. He moved past my desk without acknowledgement, the way water flows around a stone. In his wake, I caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something sharper, the metallic edge of someone who'd been up late making phone calls to Washington. "Good morning, Dr. Webb," I said because institutional protocol demanded it. He paused at his office door, finally looking at me with the expression of someone trying to place a familiar face in an unfamiliar context. "Sarah, isn't it?" "Yes, sir. I'd only introduced myself 47 times over the past 3 years. Those copies ready for the morning review?" I held up Patricia's proposal. "Dr. Henley's environmental study. She's requesting feedback before the NSF deadline." Something shifted in his expression, a micro-calculation I'd learned to recognize in the faces of powerful men. "Right. Put that in the secondary review pile. I want to give it the attention it deserves." The secondary review pile, where good research went to fossilize. "Sir, the deadline is, I'm aware of the timeline." His voice carried the weight of budget authority and tenure decisions. "These community health studies require extra scrutiny. We can't afford to rush important work." He disappeared into his office, leaving me alone with the stack of papers and a decision that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. I could file Patricia's proposal, where it would gather dust, or I could do what I'd been trained never to do, read the fine print of the policies that governed our little academic kingdom. I pulled out my phone and started a voice memo the way I'd been doing for months without quite admitting why. Tuesday, October 15th, 7:47 a.m., Dr. Webb directed Patricia Henley's NSF proposal to secondary review. Environmental toxin study methodology appears sound, community impact significant. I paused, watching his office door. NSF deadline is Friday. The facilities crew was setting up for the morning coffee service, their industrial cart squeaking across the polished floor. Maria Santos emerged from the supply closet, her arms full of napkin dispensers, and caught my eye with the kind of look that said she'd been listening. "That man," she said quietly, arranging napkins with the same precision she brought to everything, "he keeps very regular hours." I looked up from Patricia's proposal. "Regular how?" "Every Tuesday, 7:30 sharp. Makes the same phone calls." She glanced toward Webb's office. "Walls ain't as thick as people think." A memory surfaced, Patricia mentioning that her proposal rejections always came on Wednesdays like clockwork. Always after Tuesday's faculty meeting. Always with the same language about additional review requirements. I opened my laptop and pulled up the faculty database, cross-referencing proposal submissions with approval dates. The pattern emerged like developing photographs. Patricia's applications clustered in the secondary review column, while proposals from Webb's preferred researchers sailed through primary approval. Environmental justice studies, community health initiatives, anything that might complicate the university's relationship with its corporate donors, all relegated to bureaucratic purgatory. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Any word on the NSF Proposal Community Center is counting on this funding." The Community Center, where Patricia ran free health screenings every weekend, where kids from the surrounding neighborhood came for tutoring, where the waiting list for services stretched longer every month. If her funding dried up, those services disappeared. I scrolled through my contact list until I found the number I needed. Dr. Patricia Henley's office. Patricia, it's Sarah from Research Administration. Can you meet me in conference room B in 10 minutes? Is everything okay? Did something happen with my proposal? I watched Webb's office door calculating risks. Everything's fine. I just have some questions about your methodology section. Conference room B sat at the end of the hall far enough from Webb's office that conversation stayed private. Patricia arrived with her laptop bag and the slightly frazzled energy of someone juggling too many projects with too little support. What kind of questions? She asked, settling into a chair across from me. I spread her proposal across the table, pointing to the section I'd highlighted. Your sample size calculations, walk me through them. For the next 20 minutes, Patricia explained her research design with the kind of passionate precision that reminded me why I'd gone into higher education. She talked about particulate matter readings in neighborhoods where children played, about correlation patterns that painted a picture of systematic environmental neglect, about community partnerships built on trust and mutual respect. The data is clear, she said, pulling up charts on her laptop. These communities are bearing the brunt of industrial pollution, and the health outcomes reflect that burden, but getting funding for this kind of research. She shook her head. Sometimes I think the system is designed to prevent these studies from happening. I closed her proposal and leaned back in my chair. Patricia, how many applications have you submitted to NSF over the past 3 years? 7, 8 if you count the resubmission of my water quality study. And how many have been approved, Machunmang? Her laugh carried no humor. 0, they all get caught in extended review periods. Webb says the methodology needs refinement, or the community partnerships aren't sufficiently established, or the sample sizes are too ambitious. She rubbed her temples. I'm starting to wonder if I should look for positions elsewhere. That was the moment I made my decision. Not a dramatic revelation, just the quiet recognition that some lines once crossed change the shape of everything that follows. Patricia, I need to show you something. But first, I need you to promise me that what I'm about to share stays between us until we figure out how to handle it properly. She studied my face with the same intensity she brought to her research. Sarah, what are you talking about? I opened my laptop and pulled up the faculty database, rotating the screen so she could see the spreadsheet I'd been building. 3 years of proposal data, sorted by researcher, funding source, and approval timeline. Her eyes moved across the columns, and I watched understanding dawn in her expression. Webb's people, she said quietly, their applications go through in weeks. 4 weeks average, sometimes less. And mine, Iduri, yours get flagged for secondary review every single time. She scrolled through the data, her face growing pale. The environmental justice studies, the community health initiatives, they're all here, all sitting in bureaucratic limbo while the corporate-friendly research gets fast-tracked. Patricia closed the laptop and looked at me with new attention. Sarah, how did you compile this? I've been keeping records. Voice memos, email, timestamps, document trails. I paused, weighing my words. I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Her phone rang, the generic ringtone that meant a call from the university directory. She glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Webb's office. Answer it. She put the call on speaker. Webb's voice filled the small conference room, carrying the casual authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. Patricia, I've had a chance to review your latest NSF proposal. I'm afraid we're going to need some substantial revisions before it can move forward. Patricia's knuckles went white as she gripped the phone. What kind of revisions, Marcus? The usual concerns. Methodology could be tighter, sample size might be too ambitious. You know how rigorous the NSF review process can be. The smile was audible in his voice. Why don't you plan to resubmit next cycle? Give you time to really polish the research design. The deadline is Friday. If we miss this cycle, science doesn't run on artificial deadlines, Patricia. Quality research takes time. The call ended, leaving us in silence. Patricia stared at the phone as if it had bitten her. Next cycle, she said. That's 8 months from now. And by then the community center loses its current funding. The health screening program shuts down. The kids lose their tutoring support. She looked up at me. Sarah, what you showed me, if this is systematic, it is. Then we need to document everything. Every conversation, every delay, every pattern of discrimination. Her voice was steady now, carrying the weight of someone who'd made a decision. We need to build a case that's so airtight it can't be dismissed or buried. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. We already started. Over the next 3 weeks, Patricia and I developed a routine. She would submit required documentation through normal channels while I tracked the administrative response. Every delayed approval, every additional requirement, every bureaucratic obstacle went into our growing database. I started arriving early and staying late using my administrative access to cross-reference budget allocations with approval timelines. The pattern wasn't just discrimination, it was systematic defunding of research that threatened corporate interests, environmental studies that might implicate major donors, community health initiatives that could lead to uncomfortable questions about industrial pollution, social justice research that might complicate the university's public relations narrative. Maria Santos became an unexpected ally, her facility's access providing pieces of the puzzle I couldn't reach. She mentioned Webb's Tuesday phone calls, his closed-door meetings with development officers, his late-night document shredding sessions that she documented with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned not to trust powerful men. "He thinks we're invisible," she told me one evening, emptying waste baskets in the administrative suite. "Thinks we don't hear, don't see, don't remember." She held up a crumpled memo from Webb's trash. "But we do." The memo outlined a strategy for managing problematic research initiatives that might complicate donor relationships. Patricia's environmental studies were specifically mentioned, along with two other faculty members whose work focused on social justice issues. The language was careful, academic freedom was respected, but resource allocation required strategic thinking about the university's long-term partnerships. I photographed the memo and added it to our growing file. We had documentation, we had patterns, we had testimony from Maria about Webb's private conversations. What we didn't have was a platform that wouldn't be buried by the same administrative machinery we were fighting. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the university's new compliance officer, had been hired after a sexual harassment scandal had prompted a comprehensive review of institutional policies. She'd been conducting one-on-one interviews with staff members, gathering data about systemic issues that might require administrative attention. I scheduled a meeting for a Thursday afternoon when Webb would be off campus at a donors conference. Chen's office felt different from the rest of the administrative suite windows that actually opened plants that looked healthy furniture, that invited conversation rather than demanding deference. "Thank you for making time, Sarah. I know these conversations can feel intimidating, but my job is to ensure that university policies are being followed fairly across all departments." Dr. Chen was younger than I'd expected, with the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd spent time in environments where attention to detail meant survival. Her questions were precise without being invasive, and she took notes with the mechanical pencil that every compliance officer seemed to carry. I wanted to discuss some patterns I've observed in research administration. I began pulling out the folder I'd prepared, specifically disparities in proposal review timelines that seemed to correlate with research focus areas. I walked her through the data methodically, the way Patricia had taught me to present research findings. Application dates, review periods, approval rates sorted by faculty member and research topic. The environmental studies clustered in extended review periods, while corporate-friendly research moved through the system with remarkable efficiency. "This is concerning," Dr. Chen said, examining the spreadsheets. "Have you brought these discrepancies to Dr. Webb's attention?" "Dr. Webb is aware of the review timelines. He's the one implementing the secondary review process. And the secondary review criteria, are they documented in official policy?" I smiled, recognizing the trap Webb had built for himself. "No. The faculty handbook specifies standard review procedures, but secondary review is implemented at administrative discretion." She made a note. "Administrative discretion that appears to correlate with research content rather than methodological concerns." "That's correct." Dr. Chen closed my folder and leaned back in her chair. "Sarah, this documentation is thorough, but I need to ask why bring this to me rather than filing a formal grievance through faculty channels." The question I'd been preparing for. "Because the faculty grievance process routes through research administration. Dr. Webb would be reviewing complaints about his own policies." "I see." Another note. "And you believe this pattern represents systematic discrimination rather than isolated incidents of poor judgment." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. "Dr. Chen, would you like to hear some recorded conversations?" For the next hour, I played selected recordings. Webb dismissing community health research as advocacy masquerading as science. His phone calls coordinating with donors about managing problematic faculty. his explicit instructions to delay environmental studies until community interest moves on to other issues. Dr. Chen listened without interrupting, her notes growing longer as the evidence accumulated. When the recordings finished, she sat quietly for several minutes, the weight of institutional liability settling over her like fog. Sarah, I need to ask about the source of these recordings. Were the participants aware they were being documented? All recordings were made in public areas or during conversations where I was a direct participant. No privacy expectations were violated under state recording laws. And Dr. Henley, is she aware of this documentation process? Dr. Henley has been cooperative with the investigation. Investigation. The word hung between us like a bridge we were both deciding whether to cross. Sarah, what outcome are you seeking from this conversation? The question I'd been asking myself for weeks. Not revenge that was too small, too personal. Not just Patricia's funding that was too narrow, too temporary. What I wanted was something larger: acknowledgement that the system had been corrupted and commitment to restoration that went beyond individual cases. I want the research proposal process to be transparent and equitable. I want secondary review criteria documented in official policy. I want faculty members to have confidence that their work will be evaluated on methodological merit rather than political convenience. Dr. Chen made final notes and closed her notebook. Sarah, I'm going to need you to prepare a formal complaint document outlining these concerns. Include all supporting evidence, spreadsheets, recordings, witness statements. Can you have that to me by Monday? Yes, ma'am. And Sarah, until this investigation is complete, I need you to continue your normal administrative duties without alerting Dr. Webb to our conversation. Can you do that? A free discerning and here. I thought about Patricia's community center, about the children who needed tutoring, and the families who depended on health screenings, about the research that could prevent environmental disasters, but only if someone with authority was willing to listen. Yes, ma'am, I can do that. That weekend, Patricia and I worked in her home office, assembling 3 years of documentation into a coherent narrative. Her dining room table disappeared under stacks of proposals, budget reports, email printouts, and audio transcriptions. We built a timeline that showed the systematic nature of discrimination, cross-referencing Webb's decisions with donor contributions in corporate partnerships. Look at this, Patricia said, pointing to a cluster of dates on our calendar. Every time I submit an environmental proposal, Webb has a meeting with Hartley Industries within a week. Hartley Industries, the chemical company whose corporate campus sat 15 miles upriver from the communities Patricia studied. Their donations to the university had tripled over the past 5 years, coinciding exactly with the period when environmental research had started disappearing into bureaucratic quicksand. It's not just conflict of interest, I said, reviewing the financial reports. It's active suppression of research that threatens donor relationships. We worked until Sunday evening, building a case that felt airtight and unassailable. Documentation, recordings, witness statements, financial correlations, everything a compliance officer would need to demonstrate systematic discrimination and institutional corruption. Monday morning arrived with unusual weather, November snow that made the campus look clean and hopeful. I arrived at work early, carrying the completed complaint in a sealed envelope addressed to Dr. Chen. The administrative suite felt different now, charged with the electricity of secrets about to surface. Webb's office door was closed when I walked past, but I could hear his voice through the wall, the same controlled tone he used for difficult conversations. Something about budget reallocations and strategic priorities, the language of institutional politics dressed up as academic discourse. I left the envelope on Dr. Chen's desk and returned to my normal duties, answering emails, processing paperwork, maintaining the facade of administrative compliance while documenting every interaction for the investigation that was now officially underway. At 10:30, Dr. Chen called my extension. Sarah, could you come to my office when you have a moment? She was reading through my complaint when I arrived, the thick folder of evidence spread across her desk like a legal brief. Her expression was careful, professional, but I caught something else underneath the look of someone who'd found exactly what they'd been afraid to discover. This is comprehensive work, she said. The documentation is thorough, the legal arguments are sound, and the evidence appears to support systematic discrimination claims under Title VII and university policy. I waited, sensing the conditional nature of her praise. However, allegations this serious require investigation procedures that will be visible. Dr. Webb will be informed of the complaint and given opportunity to respond. Other faculty members will be interviewed. The process may become public. I understand. Sarah, once this moves forward, there's no controlling the outcome. Dr. Webb has significant political capital within the university. His donor relationships generate substantial revenue. People in positions of authority may prefer to resolve this quietly rather than risk public scandal. The warning was clear: powerful people protect their own, and justice often loses to institutional convenience. Dr. Chen, if we don't pursue this complaint, what happens to Dr. Henley's research? Key. Her proposals will continue to be reviewed according to current procedures. And the environmental studies that could prevent children from being poisoned by industrial pollution? Dr. Chen closed the folder and looked at me with something approaching respect. Sarah, you understand the risks you're taking? Yes, ma'am. I understand the risks of staying silent too. She picked up her phone and dialed an internal extension. President Morrison's office. This is Dr. Chen in compliance. I need to schedule a meeting to discuss institutional policy violations that require immediate administrative attention. The investigation moved quickly once it began. Dr. Chen interviewed 17 faculty members over 2 weeks, collecting testimony about research proposal processes, administrative interference, and the climate of academic freedom within the university. The patterns that emerged painted a picture of systematic suppression that went beyond individual discrimination to institutional corruption. Patricia was interviewed on a Wednesday afternoon. She emerged from Chen's office looking pale but determined, carrying the weight of someone who'd told difficult truths to people with the power to act on them. How did it go? I asked. She asked about every delayed proposal, every meeting with Webb, every conversation where he discouraged community-focused research. Patricia rubbed her temples. Sarah, she knows about the donor meetings. She knows about the financial connections. This is bigger than we thought. That evening, I received a call from Dr. Chen requesting a follow-up meeting. Her office felt different now, more formal, with the presence of legal documents and institutional protocols that hadn't been there before. Sarah, I want to inform you that based on your complaint and supporting investigation, I'm recommending formal disciplinary action against Dr. Webb for violation of university policies regarding equitable treatment, academic freedom, and administrative transparency. The words I'd been hoping to hear for months. But Dr. Chen's expressions suggested complications. However, President Morrison has expressed concerns about the potential impact on donor relationships and public perception. He's proposed an alternative resolution that would involve policy changes and administrative restructuring without formal disciplinary action. Political compromise, justice diluted by institutional convenience. What kind of policy changes? Transparent criteria for research proposal review, documented timelines for approval processes, and establishment of an independent oversight committee to monitor administrative decisions affecting academic freedom. And Dr. Webb would receive additional training on equity and inclusion policies. His administrative decision-making authority would be subject to oversight review. I sat quietly for several minutes, weighing outcomes. Policy changes would prevent future discrimination, but they wouldn't acknowledge what had already happened. Administrative oversight would constrain Webb's power, but it wouldn't restore the research that had been buried or the communities that had been abandoned. Dr. Chen, what happens to Dr. Henley's current NSF proposal? Under the new policies, her proposal would be subject to expedited review with transparent criteria and documented timeline. And the secondary review process that's been burying community health research, that process would be eliminated. All proposals would follow standardized procedures regardless of research focus. I thought about Patricia's community center, about Maria's patient documentation of institutional corruption, about the children who needed someone with authority to care about their exposure to environmental toxins. Dr. Chen, I appreciate the policy changes, but I need to ask, what message does this resolution send to faculty members who are considering research that might challenge powerful interests? Her smile was rueful. Sarah, institutional change is often incremental. Perfect justice is rare, but systematic improvement is possible. And if Dr. Webb continues to discriminate just more carefully, then the Oversight Committee will have authority to recommend more serious consequences. That evening, I called Patricia to discuss the proposed resolution. We met at a coffee shop off campus, far from university politics and administrative surveillance. She looked tired but not defeated, carrying herself with the dignity of someone who'd fought for something larger than personal advancement. Policy changes are significant, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. Independent oversight could prevent the kind of discrimination we documented. but it doesn't acknowledge what happened. It doesn't restore the research opportunities that were lost. It doesn't hold Webb accountable for systematic corruption. Patricia was quiet for several minutes, considering options that all involve some form of compromise. Sarah, let me ask you something. If we reject this resolution and push for formal disciplinary action, what do you think happens? Either we win and set a precedent for accountability, or we lose and face retaliation. And if we accept the resolution, policy changes protect future faculty, but past discrimination goes unaddressed. She leaned back in her chair, weighing justice against pragmatism. What do you want to do? The question I'd been avoiding for weeks. What I wanted was acknowledgement that systematic discrimination had occurred, consequences proportionate to the harm that had been caused, and assurance that Webb couldn't continue corrupting the research process. What seemed achievable was partial reform that would prevent some future problems while leaving past injustices unresolved. I want to hear what Webb has to say about the evidence. Patricia raised her eyebrows. You want to confront him? I want him to have the opportunity to respond to the documentation we've assembled, face to face on the record with witnesses present. Sarah, that's not how these investigations typically work. Then maybe that's part of the problem. I called Dr. Chen the next morning and requested a meeting that would include all parties, Webb, Patricia, myself, and institutional representatives who could authorize final resolution. The suggestion violated normal investigation protocols, but Chen seemed intrigued by the possibility of direct testimony rather than bureaucratic negotiation. Sarah, Dr. Webb has significant political capital. Are you prepared for him to challenge your documentation and question your motivations? Yes, ma'am. Are you prepared for him to answer questions about systematic discrimination under oath? The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, exactly 4 weeks after I'd started voice recording Webb's conversations. The location was the large conference room on the executive floor, with windows that overlooked the campus, where Patricia conducted her community health research. I arrived 30 minutes early, setting up my laptop and arranging printed copies of key evidence. Maria Santos wheeled in the conference phone system, catching my eye with a look that said she'd be listening from the facilities closet if needed. Patricia arrived with her proposal files and the calm demeanor of someone who'd spent years defending research to skeptical audiences. Dr. Chen entered with President Morrison and the university's legal counsel institutional authority mobilized to manage potential scandal. Webb arrived last, carrying himself with the casual confidence of someone who'd survived previous challenges to his authority. I appreciate everyone's willingness to address these concerns directly, Dr. Chen began. Dr. Webb, you've had an opportunity to review the complaint filed by Sarah Martinez. Would you like to respond to the allegations? Webb opened his portfolio and removed a legal pad covered with handwritten notes. His preparation was thorough, his demeanor suggesting wounded professionalism rather than guilt or defensiveness. Dr. Chen, President Morrison, I want to address these concerns directly because I believe there's been significant misunderstanding about standard administrative procedures and research quality standards. He looked around the table, his gaze settling on me with what might have been disappointment rather than anger. Sarah, I appreciate your dedication to institutional efficiency, but I'm concerned that you may have misinterpreted normal administrative discretion as discriminatory behavior. I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet I'd prepared for this moment. Dr. Webb, could you explain why environmental research applications require an average of 18 weeks for review, while corporate-sponsored proposals are approved in 4 weeks? Research timelines depend on methodological complexity, community partnership verification, and budget justification requirements. More complex studies require more thorough review. Is that why Dr. Henley's water quality study was delayed for 11 months, while Dr. Harrison's pharmaceutical research was approved in 3 weeks? Webb's pen stopped moving. Dr. Harrison's methodology was more straightforward. I clicked to the next spreadsheet tab. Dr. Harrison's study involved 12 pharmaceutical companies across 8 states with a sample size of 40,000 participants. Dr. Henley's study involved 2 communities with a sample size of 800 families. Which methodology is more complex? President Morrison leaned forward, studying the data I'd projected on the conference room screen. The financial comparisons were stark. Environmental research starved for resources, while corporate-friendly studies received expedited approval and enhanced funding. Dr. Webb, Morrison said, can you explain the criteria used for secondary review designation? Secondary review is reserved for studies that require additional scrutiny, due to community partnership complexity or potential policy implications. Patricia opened her laptop and pulled up the audio file she'd prepared. Dr. Webb, I have a recording of our conversation from October 23rd. Would you like me to play your comments about community health research being advocacy masquerading as science? The room temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. Webb's confident expression faltered as he recognized the implications of documented conversations. Patricia, that conversation was taken out of context. I was expressing concerns about methodological rigor, not dismissing community health research. Then you support rigorous community health studies that meet NSF methodology standards. Of course. I pulled out the memo Maria had retrieved from Webb's trash, smoothing the crumpled pages on the conference table. Dr. Webb, did you write this strategy document about managing problematic research initiatives that might complicate donor relationships? Webb studied the document, his political calculation visible in the micro-expressions that crossed his face. Denial would require him to challenge evidence that could be forensically verified. Admission would confirm systematic discrimination. Administrative decisions require consideration of multiple factors, including institutional sustainability and strategic partnerships. Dr. Chen made notes while Webb constructed his defense. Dr. Webb, are you stating that research approval decisions should be influenced by donor preferences? Hey, Chedun. I'm stating that institutional decisions require strategic thinking about long-term relationships and resource sustainability, even when that strategic thinking results in systematic discrimination against faculty members whose research focuses on environmental justice. The legal counsel whispered something to President Morrison, who nodded and made his own notes. The institutional liability was becoming clear: systematic discrimination, documented with recordings, financial records, and witness testimony that would be difficult to dismiss in court. Patricia clicked to her next audio file. Dr. Webb, this recording is from your phone conversation with Hartley Industries on November 2nd. Would you like to explain your comments about containing environmental research that might create regulatory complications? The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Webb looked around the table, calculating options that were narrowing with each piece of evidence. His political capital was substantial, but documentation of systematic discrimination created liability that even powerful administrators couldn't ignore. I believe there's been significant misunderstanding about the context and intent of these conversations, he said finally. Dr. Webb, I said opening the folder that contained 3 years of compiled evidence. Would you like to review the complete documentation of research proposal discrimination before you continue? I spread the timeline across the conference table: proposal, dates, review periods, approval, decisions, financial correlations, and recorded conversations that painted a comprehensive picture of institutional corruption. The pattern was undeniable: environmental research systematically delayed, while corporate-sponsored studies received expedited approval. President Morrison studied the evidence, his expression growing increasingly concerned as the scope of discrimination became clear. The legal counsel took photographs of key documents, already building the case file that would be needed for institutional defense. Dr. Webber, Morrison said, these allegations represent serious violations of university policy regarding equitable treatment and academic freedom. Do you have alternative explanations for the patterns documented in this evidence? Webb closed his portfolio and leaned back in his chair, the demeanor of someone who'd recognized the futility of continued denial. President Morrison, I've always prioritized research quality and institutional sustainability. If administrative decisions have created the appearance of discriminatory treatment, that was never my intention. Dr. Webb, intention aside, do you acknowledge that environmental research proposals have been subjected to longer review periods and additional requirements not applied to other research areas? Administrative decisions are complex. Multiple factors influence review timelines. Dr. Chen interrupted his evasion. Dr. Webb, yes or no, have environmental research proposals been systematically delayed compared to corporate-sponsored research? Another long silence. Webb's political instincts warred with the legal reality of documented discrimination. Continued denial would require him to challenge evidence that could be forensically verified, while admission would trigger institutional liability and disciplinary action. Review timelines have varied based on administrative assessment of methodological requirements. That's not an answer to my question. Webb looked at his legal pad, where his prepared talking points had become irrelevant in the face of comprehensive documentation. Yes, he said quietly. Environmental research has been subject to extended review periods, and those extended review periods correlated with your phone conversations with corporate donors. Non-resurinum, tirananam. Administrative decisions involve multiple considerations. Patricia leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years of systematic discrimination. Dr. Webb, my research focuses on industrial pollution in communities where children are being poisoned. Your administrative decisions have delayed that research for years while people suffered. Do you understand the human cost of your strategic thinking? Webb met her gaze for the first time since the meeting began, and something shifted in his expression. Not guilt exactly, but recognition of consequences he'd been able to ignore while hiding behind bureaucratic language. Patricia, research quality cannot be compromised for political expediency. My research quality has never been questioned by peer reviewers. Only by administrators who find my conclusions inconvenient. President Morrison consulted with the legal counsel, their whispered conversation carrying the urgency of institutional damage control. The evidence was comprehensive, the discrimination was documented, and continued stonewalling would only compound the legal liability. Dr. Webb Morrison said, "Given the evidence presented today, I'm authorizing a comprehensive review of research administration policies and procedures. You'll be placed on administrative leave pending completion of that review." Administrative leave. Not the formal disciplinary action I'd hoped for, but acknowledgement that systematic discrimination had occurred and required institutional response. Additionally, all research proposals currently in secondary review will be expedited through standardized approval processes. Dr. Henley, your NSF application will be prioritized for immediate completion. Patricia's environmental research would finally receive fair consideration. The community center would maintain its funding. Children would have access to health screenings and environmental protection studies that could prevent future poisoning. Dr. Chen gathered her notes and closed the complaint file. "Sarah, thank you for bringing these concerns to institutional attention. The documentation you assembled was essential for establishing the systematic nature of discrimination and ensuring appropriate administrative response." Webb packed his portfolio and stood to leave, but paused at the conference room door. For a moment, his carefully constructed professional facade cracked, revealing something more human underneath. "Sarah," he said, "I hope you understand that administrative decisions are never simple. Multiple constituencies, competing pressures, limited resources, sometimes the system produces outcomes that nobody intended." I looked at him across the evidence-covered table, thinking about Patricia's community center and Maria's patient documentation, and the children who needed someone with authority to care about environmental justice. Dr. Webb, the system produces the outcomes that people with power choose to create. The question is whether those outcomes serve justice or convenience. He nodded slowly, perhaps recognizing the truth in that assessment, and left the conference room without further comment. Over the following weeks, the institutional changes moved quickly. Patricia's NSF proposal was approved within days, along with backlogged applications from other faculty members whose research had been systematically delayed. The secondary review process was eliminated, replaced with transparent criteria and documented timelines that prevented administrative discrimination. Maria Santos was promoted to facility supervisor. Her attention to detail and institutional memory recognized as valuable assets for maintaining administrative accountability. Dr. Chen established regular compliance audits to monitor research proposal processes and prevent future discrimination. I was offered a position in the new Institutional Equity Office, with responsibility for monitoring systemic fairness across university departments. The work would be similar to what I'd been doing, informally documenting patterns, investigating complaints, ensuring that policies serve justice rather than convenience. 3 months later, I sat in Patricia's community center, watching children work on science projects while their parents attended health screenings funded by her NSF grant. The environmental data she was collecting would inform policy decisions about industrial pollution and community health protections. Research that had been buried for years was finally seeing sunlight. "You know," young Patricia said, joining me at the table where kids were building models of water filtration systems, "I never thanked you properly for what you did." "You don't need to thank me. You did the hard work, the research, the community partnerships, the grant applications that should have been approved years ago. But you made the system work for justice instead of convenience. That's not something administrative assistants are supposed to do. I watched a 10-year-old girl explain her filtration design to her younger brother, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd been taught that her questions mattered and her communities deserved protection. Maybe that's something everyone's supposed to do, and I said, pay attention to how systems work, document the patterns, speak up when justice gets buried under bureaucracy. Patricia smiled, the expression of someone who'd learned that academic freedom required constant vigilance from people at every level of institutional power. The next faculty meeting should be interesting, she said. New research policies, transparent review processes, and administrators who know they're being watched by people who keep very good records. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app, the habit that had started this entire process. Tuesday, February 18th, 4:30 p.m., Community Center visit, environmental research implementation proceeding on schedule. Children engaged in science education, families accessing preventive health care. System modifications achieving intended outcomes. I paused the recording and looked around the room at researchers who could now pursue justice-oriented studies, at community members accessing services that corporate donors had tried to eliminate, at children learning that their health and safety mattered to people with the power to protect them. Shakati, justice. I added to the recording, requires documentation, courage, and the belief that systems can be changed when enough people decide that truth matters more than convenience. The work continues. Every Tuesday, every recorded conversation, every pattern documented, and every voice raised in defense of institutional integrity. Because justice isn't a destination, it's a practice that requires constant attention from people who refuse to let powerful systems serve only powerful people. In the end, that might be the most important thing I learned, that democracy lives in the details, in the administrative decisions that shape how institutions treat people, in the willingness of ordinary workers to document extraordinary patterns of discrimination, and in the recognition that everyone has both the power and the responsibility to ensure that justice serves communities rather than convenience. The photocopier still wheezes when it processes Patricia's research proposals, but now those proposals move through transparent review processes with documented timelines and equitable standards. The sound has become something different, not the death rattle of buried research, but the productive noise of institutional systems that finally serve their stated purposes. Sometimes the smallest changes create the largest transformations. Sometimes justice comes not through dramatic confrontation, but through patient documentation and the courage to speak recorded truth to institutional power. Sometimes administrative assistants get to help rebuild the world one transparent policy at a time.